what the senator from South Dakota just said is a really massive oversimplification of what is happening here. The President of the United States made it very clear. We're not going to fund the government week to week to week to week to week. It costs more money. It's a completely incompetent way to be funding the government of the United States of America. People need to make plans. People need to let contracts. People need to be able to know how much they're going to be spending. How much can they hire? Who can they hire? I mean, that is an incompetent way to manage the government of the United States. And the President made it clear. We've already done 2 short-term fundings of the government, and we said we're not going to do it again. Reach an agreement. Come to an agreement. Show the maturity and the capacity to be able to do the business of our nation. And they're just asking for another delay. But they're not just asking for that. They've also put their ideological wish list for that particular moment into that particular request. And Mr. President, this is a dangerous moment for our economy and for our country. And frankly, it's an embarrassing moment for the Congress of the United States, an embarrassing moment for, I think, the American people. They have to watch their Congress struggling to do what we were sent here to do, which is compromise and find a way to do the business of our country. And there's a reason we're standing on the precipice of this argument. I believe we can still get an agreement in these next hours. I believe we may well get that agreement in these next hours. But what a show to get there. How extraordinary it is that for the first time since the 1990s, when incidentally the Republicans ran the House. Does it ring a bell? That's the last time we had a shutdown in the United States Congress. And here we are back again with the same threats, the same need to do brinksmanship that puts an ideological wish list on the table that you can't pass any other way. So try to force it down the throats of Americans at the last minute by threatening to shut down the government. I got to tell you, in China, they got to be laughing at us right now. They got to be clapping. How terrific that the United States of America can't make a decision. Boy, does that send a wonderful message to businesses all around the world. They can't make a decision. They can't decide an energy policy. They can't decide an infrastructure policy. They can't fix their schools. They can't do anything, and now they can't even get a budget. That's a hell of a message around the world. While we're running around the world preaching the virtues of democracy, people have got to be scratching their heads and saying, that's what we're going to get? This is not because one side of the political aisle does not want to do what the other side of the aisle doesn't want to do in terms of cutting the deficit. This is not about the deficit. You only have to listen to Speaker Boehner and to the President, the Majority Leader, and others and add up the math. And it's beyond dispute that Democrats have agreed to make the largest budget cuts in American history in discretionary spending. It's also beyond dispute that we've agreed to travel far more than halfway. We're at about 73% of what they requested in terms of reductions. And last night, the President of the United States sat with Speaker Boehner and said, I agree to the number. This is not about the number. We agree with the number, providing we can also look beyond discretionary spending and look to the larger budget, which is the way you ought to be doing budgeting for the United States. We've compromised, Mr. President. We've agreed to well more than what is reasonable with respect to some of these reductions. So this is not about making cuts to the deficit. That's not what it's about. And America needs to understand that. In a negotiation, there's always a back and forth. There's a give and a take. But we're at this extraordinary moment in American history where a small group of people seem to be intimidating their own leadership. I mean, I keep hearing about what a tough position the Speaker is in. He's not in a tough position. He's a Speaker of the House of the United States of America. It's a job he always wanted. It's a job he wants to have. He asked for it. And his position is no tougher than anybody else here who has to make a cut on these kinds of issues. What are you for? But he's allowing a small group, a minority within a group, maybe a minority of a minority, I don't know. But they're dictating. And they're saying, oh, we got to do this. We got to take America right up to the brink, right up to the edge, and show to the world that we're not able to do our business in a quiet and responsible and thoughtful way. Rigid ideology is threatening to shut down the federal government of the United States. And let's not play games and pretend that some short-term stopgap measure when the president has said we're not going to do that anymore. It's no way to run the government, and it costs more money. And they're doing this with impunity because all the voices of moderation and common sense, all the voices on the other side of the aisle who say we don't want to shut down the government, and they really don't. I know some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. They get it. They don't want to do this. But either they're not being listened to or something's happened over there where there's a level of anarchy within the institutional process of the Congress that is dictating where we are. So, Mr. President, why is it that 100% of the cuts that we are being asked to make are coming from only 12% of the budget? I mean, there isn't an American who'll sit there and say, what do you mean? You mean only 12% of the budget is up for grabs, and they're taking 100% of their cuts from the 12% of the budget? That doesn't make a lot of sense, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. Defense spending, the Pentagon, are you telling me that every system that we're buying over there, that the procurement process of the Pentagon is so perfect that we can't make some cuts? But they're not trying. That's not on the table. Everybody knows the big items of our budget deficit are Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Those aren't on the table. They're not being considered. How can you say this is not ideological when the only things that are being cut are the very things that some people have been trying to cut for 40 years, that they oppose as a matter of principle in their entire political life, and they can't get them any other way, so now they're trying to jam them down the American throat by saying we're threatening to shut down the government of the United States. Mr. President, this isn't about the budget deficit. If it were, we would have made the largest cuts in American history because we've agreed to those cuts. Because every single one of us understands why we're in the predicament we're in. Yes, we have a huge budget deficit and a huge debt. Now, I can't get over how quick my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are to forget about how we got here. Because when President George Bush became president, we had a $5.6 trillion surplus. We had balanced the budget. We did what we needed to do. And then they came in and passed 2 huge tax cuts for the wealthiest people in the country that they didn't ask for and didn't need, and all of a sudden we had a deficit. Of course, because they gave tax cuts on the credit card. And then we had 2 wars, one of which was a war we never had to have, the war in Iraq. $1 trillion. That's your deficit. And then they had all their cronies guarding the foxes guarding the coops, and the result was Wall Street ran away with American economic interests, and we had the housing crisis and the Wall Street crash, the greatest loss of wealth in modern times, and the result was the deficit and the debt went up, and President Obama came in, and we were losing 750,000 jobs a month the day he came into office. They forget that. They forget their complicity in that. So we are where we are now, Mr. President. The fact is that, this fight, you know what they've been trying to do? They've been trying to shut down the government if we don't get Environmental Protection Agency restraints into there, which they weren't able to win otherwise. They have about 65 different ideological wish list items now being reduced, but that's what the fight has been about for these last weeks. How much time do I have?
The senator's time has expired.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the remainder of my comments to be placed in the record as if read in full. But I just hope we're going to be responsible here, and I'm sorry that we're not able to have the normal kind of debate the Senate has on this.